Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever wanted to build your own reality, then do we have the Magic Club show for you. Today I'll be talking with Mitch Horowitz, a leader in the New Thought movement, Penn Award-winning historian, the author of Occult America and One Simple Idea, and a phenomenal must-read new book, The Miracle Club. And that's just what I want to talk with him about today, about how your thoughts become reality and what this means for you. That, plus we'll talk about The Who, The Clash, and the Dead Kennedys.
All right.
Infinite Tuesdays and the Monkeys. Gotcha. The Power of Schrödinger's Cat. Edgar Cayce and a Magic Staff. And what in the world a schoolmistress, Cary Grant, and a long-lost movie called Father Goose has to do with anything. So welcome back to the show, Mitch. Are you ready to shine?
Yes, thank you. Love the subjects. Appreciate it.
And I found that movie. I'm sure somebody told you what the movie is before now, but I found the Cary Grant movie is called Father Goose.
Father Goose, yeah. I looked it up and I eventually discovered it, after years.
Awesome. And we'll probably dive in there. But first, I want to talk about a topic that I have a feeling you're chomping at the bit to talk about. Schrödinger's cat.
Oh, sure. One of my favorite topics. Schrödinger's cat is a thought experiment, but one that really leads us to some ultimate conclusions about reality, conclusions that cannot be escaped, which is exactly what the 20th century physicist Erwin Schrödinger intended when he devised the experiment. We're really diving into the deep end of the pool here. So
absolutely. We're going right in.
Everybody has to deal.
If you haven't heard an interview from Mitch before, we have many, many great interviews. So we're just throwing you into the pond today. That's
terrific. Essentially, the Schrödinger's cat thought experiment is this. Erwin Schrödinger, the great physicist, was frustrated in the 1930s with some of the surreal results that were coming out of quantum physics experiments. Physicists in the particle lab were seeing things that violated everyday reality. Our everyday reality is that time moves in a straight line, that a chair is the chair, that an object can only be in one place. And the experiments that were occurring in quantum physics labs were violating all of that. Objects were appearing in multiple places until somebody decided to take a measurement. Infinite outcomes were possible. Objects were appearing, and by objects I mean subatomic particles, in more than one place at a time. So Schrödinger devised an experiment which he intended to use to force quantum physicists to come to grips, to come to reckoning with the surreal evidence that they were experiencing in their experiments. And Schrödinger's cat is this. Schrödinger proposed that if you were to take an ordinary house cat and fit around this cat's neck.
Maybe I should say this. No cats were hurt in the making of this experiment or in the making of this show today.
No cats were hurt. No. We want to reassure everyone this is a strictly absurdist thought experiment, but its conclusions are absolutely inevitable. So if you were to take a house cat and you were to fit it around the neck with what Schrödinger called a diabolical device, which would unleash a poison that would kill the cat when that device was exposed to an atom. This is how our experiment begins, our thought experiment. So no cats were hurt. You take a house cat, you put this diabolical device around its neck, which releases a mortal poison if it's exposed to an atom. And you take the cat and you put the cat into one of a pair of boxes, and then you seal the boxes shut. And you use some sort of a device to fire a single atom at the pair of boxes. And then you go to check on whether the cat is alive or dead. Reality would have to dictate that the atom, which you've directed at these two boxes, would have entered one of the pair of boxes. If it entered the empty box where there was no cat, the cat would be alive. If it entered the box where the cat had been placed, it would have tripped the diabolical device around its collar, and the cat would be dead. It seems so simple, and it seems so clear-cut. And what Schrödinger said is, you would actually have to allow for both outcomes, where you would have both a dead/alive cat, because you could demonstrate by a series of interaction-free experiments that at one point the atom existed in what we would call a wave state, or a state of superposition, in which it appeared in both boxes. It was literally, not figuratively, not theoretically, but literally in both places at once. This is how subatomic particles behave, and we have a whole series of interaction-free experiments that demonstrate interference patterns, basically, that show us that as a matter of physical fact, the atom would be in both boxes at once, until such time as a sentient observer made the decision to take a measurement. And when he or she made the decision to take a measurement, which in this case is to check which box, to open the lids and to check, so to speak, which box the cat is in, and see what the cat's fate is, that would determine the atom being in its localized state, localized to one place, no longer in two, but in one place. But that reality wouldn't occur until a measurement had been made. Before that measurement was made, the atom was in a wave state in which it was in both boxes. So you would have to allow for both outcomes, and it violates our sense of physical reality, because we say to ourselves, well, gee, you can't have a dead alive cat, right? It's either or. But Schrödinger would say, as a matter of fact, it's a necessity of reality based on 80 years at this point of evidence that we have coming out of quantum physics experiments that you would have a dead alive cat. And there was a series of thought experiments that took place in the 50s in which the physicist Hugh Everett made the determination that not only was Schrödinger correct that you would have a dead alive cat, but if you waited, for example, 8 hours before opening the boxes, you would find a cat that was hungry or that was restless, along with a cat that was dead. So you would have effectively created a past for the animal by having waited 8 hours to check the boxes. And, excuse me, there are physicists today theorizing that you would also, in your decision to wait a certain period of time before opening the boxes, you would have created a different past, present, future for the physicists as well, for the laboratory personnel who are experiencing what's happening. Everett's students called this the many worlds interpretation, And this harmonizes actually with the theories of the New Thought mystic Neville Goddard, he's right here on my arm. And Neville's work was the closest mystical analog to quantum physics, because Neville said, and he said this in the 1940s before any of this material was popularized, Neville said that scientists will someday demonstrate why there is a serial universe. Neville used the term serial universe even before Hugh Everett and his students coined the term multiple worlds. Scientists will someday describe why there is a serial universe, but for our purposes, what's more important is how you use it. So Neville theorized, and as anybody who watches your show knows, Neville is sort of my number one intellectual and mystical hero. Neville theorized that through our choices, through our emotionalized thoughts, through our mental images, we are constantly engaged in this process of selection. We are doing this all the time. Everybody looked at the Schrödinger's cat experiment, and remember, this is a purposely absurdist thought experiment that was intended to force quantum physicists to deal with the implication of their own data. We look at the Schrödinger's cat experiment, and it's mind-blowing. Dead alive cats and creating pasts and futures, all based on the process of decision-making. Neville said, we're doing this all the time. This is life. This is our actual ordinary existence. And if I may take it a step further,
Sure.
people rightly ask the question, okay, now wait a minute. If all this far out stuff is happening in the particle lab, if you have objects that are appearing in an infinite number of places at once, if you have objects that are affecting one another and that have no apparent relationship, Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. If you have an infinitude of outcomes, if there are multiple worlds, if there are dead alive cats, okay, all well and good that that's happening in the particle lab, but why don't we experience any of this in the here and now? There's only one Michael here. There's only one Mitch here. There's one cup here, not multiple cups. I don't see any of this. And it may be, and William James theorized about this in 1902, and quantum physicists, it took about 100 years for certain quantum theorists to actually catch up with James. He was theorizing about all this before even the dawn of what we would consider classical quantum mechanics experiments. James theorized, and quantum theorists have joined him in this, that actually these multiple worlds may be reality. It may be what we're experiencing all the time. And James theorized that when the mystic looks at something, it's as if he or she is viewing reality under a microscope. When you look at something under a microscope, or when you measure something, for example, in the quantum physics lab, you're using exquisitely fine instrumentation, and you're getting all kinds of information about what's going on. But when you pan back, when you pull back the microscope, or if I took off my glasses, so to speak, the sensory equipment that I rely upon is coarser, it's less fine, it's less specific, it's less exacting. I receive less and less information about what's really going on. Physicists today refer to this phenomenon as information leakage, where it's as if, James used the analogy of a microscope. It's as if you're panning back the microscope or the camera lens, and you're seeing less and less of what's going on. So my take on all this, and this is a perspective that I develop in the Miracle Club, is that the sensory equipment upon which we rely is not only much coarser than the microscope, so to speak, or the equipment that the quantum physicist uses in his or her laboratory, but in fact, it allows us to navigate our way through life, because our sensory data relies upon a sense of linear time, a sense of past, present, future, a sense of before, during, after, a sense of a limited, reduced, somewhat coarsened world to which we can relate. So, if I reach for a coffee cup, there's one coffee cup here. But according to Schrödinger, that's illusory. That's illusory. Because what's really going on, if you can extrapolate universally from quantum mechanics to the everyday conventional mechanics that we experience, Newtonian mechanics are illusory. They reveal a great deal, but what they reveal is what we're capable of navigating through our senses. When our senses are rendered finer, we see more of what's actually going on, which is reality as infinitude. William Blake had a sense of this, the great English poet and mystic. He said that if the doors of perception were cleansed, man could see himself as he really is, infinite. There is a line of connection between William Blake, William James, Erwin Schrödinger, Neville, Hugh Everett. All were essentially saying the same thing, although one was a poet, one was a philosopher, one was a scientist, one was a mystic. All people from different walks of life concerned with different things, and yet reaching the same conclusion, which really is attributable to Blake, which is that if we could cleanse the doors of perception, William James called it a microscope. Erwin Schrödinger called it the instrumentality of the quantum mechanics lab. Cleanse the doors of perception, we could see reality as it really is, infinite. And the prospect of this, as Neville suggested to us, the prospect of this, is that the sensitive individual can use it. The sensitive individual can use it. And that based upon your focus and your sentient decision making, you're selecting, you're choosing all the time. You're choosing from among these different realities, and they're infinite.
And that's what kind of give me goosebumps is we are the observer, that if we understand it, well, we're always collapsing the wave function, but if we can understand it, which is what your book helps us to do, we can begin to use mind as builder to create our reality.
That's right. And that's my contention in the book, and that's what I invite people to experiment with. And there are techniques that we can use, and we can experience a kind of inner empiricism if we're thoughtful about it, if we're meticulous about it, if we're mature, and we can find extraordinary things. See, this is what I love about your show. You know, there's no clickbait here. We don't tell you, well, we're going to tell you how to organize your sock drawer better. Well, we're going to tell you how to make your light bulbs last twice as long. You will get those things.
Yes.
You will have a better sock drawer, and your light bulbs will last twice as long, and those are good things. But we really go to the heart of things on this show, and that's what I love about it.
So thank you. So since we're going to go to the heart of the show, we're going to go past the clickbait, and we're probably going to get to, I am just chomping at the bit to share what I learned this morning, because it has to do with creating our reality. Maybe before we do that, we'll lay one more thing on there, which is Mike Nesmith, Norman Vincent Peale, and the Monkees. Let's talk time collapses here.
Yeah, time collapses. One of the things that I talk about in the book is this experience of what I call a time collapse, where you feel a suspension of linear time, and you feel as though past, present, and future are all playing out at once. And you can almost have a sensory experience of this process of selection. And here's one such instance of a time collapse that I describe in the final chapter of the book. About 2 summers ago, without any visible reason or antecedent, I started getting into the music of the band The Monkees. Of course, your viewers of a certain age or who are old enough to have watched the reruns will know that the Monkees were a famous TV band that were, Burbank, California's answer to the Beatles in the late 1960s. And it was a very funny TV show with these 4 very appealing figures. And Davy Jones, Peter York, Mickey Dolenz, and Mike Nesmith. And they all had these different personas. Davy was the cute one, and Mike was the smart one, and so forth and so on. And anyway, so about 2 summers ago, without any visible reason or antecedent, I start getting into the music of the Monkees, and I'm listening to them all the time. My kids are getting to know their lyrics. I'm reading background on the Monkees. I'm reading books about them, on biographies, and so on and so forth. And then towards the fall, about the month of October, I'm seated in my apartment where I am right now, and I was on a sabbatical from what was then my publishing job. And I had just finished a major project, and I was sitting around and I was thinking to myself, I really need to strike a new note. I need some new, very involving, very arousing project to invest myself in, and I wasn't sure where it would come from. And I got this notion that a major news organization would call me and would ask me to undertake a project, and it would be something completely involving and enrapturing. Within hours of having that thought, sitting on my sofa, which is to my left, I'm pounding it right now, just one sofa that I can visibly experience. I received a message over Twitter from an editor at the Washington Post who told me that they were trying to get in touch with me and they were having some trouble with my email. And I said, well, here I am. What's going on? And he said to me, did you know that Mike Nesmith of the Monkees, the smart monkey, Mike is a Christian Scientist? And I said, no, I did not know that. And he said, and did you know that Mike has a new memoir coming out? And I said, no, I didn't know that. And he said, have you ever met Mike Nesmith? Do you have any connection to him? And I said, no connection, whatever. And he said, well, would you like to review Mike's new memoir? And I said, would I? I've been listening to the monkeys for the past 4 months, and it was the strangest, most bizarre thing because my wife was scratching her head and asking, why in God's name is this 50-year-old man suddenly interested in the monkeys of all things? Where is this coming from? What this about? And I said, I don't know. And here, out of the clear blue, as I'm sitting on my couch, seemingly out of the clear blue, I feel like the cat in the Schrödinger experiment.
Yeah.
Somebody opens the box to check on me and says, oh, actually, what you've been doing for the past 3 months, in effect, or directly, has been preparation for what I'm about to ask you to do, which is to undertake this memoir of Mike Nesmith. And Mike entitled the book Infinite Tuesday because of his own belief in the nonlinearity of time, that time is in infinitude rather than a straight line, that time is like a spherical dimension filled with limitless possibilities, infinite Tuesdays, so to speak. And the book met me right where I was in terms of my own metaphysical ruminations. And I put into the book review, which your viewers can go look up, just put in Infinite Tuesday, Mitch Horowitz, or whatever. It's published at the Washington Post. I put into the end of the book review, Nesmith is correct. Reality does behave weirdly, and I told the very story in the Washington Post, and to their credit, they left it intact.
Cool.
That I've just told to your viewers. And I said, this is the craziest thing, because months before I was asked to review this book, these were the seemingly very unlikely events that were unfolding in my life, but completely likely if you grok to the many worlds theory and the other things that you and I were just talking about. Completely likely. Not just a strange coincidence, but a completely reasonable set of nonlinear events, a time collapse. And that's one of the stories from the book, and it's absolutely true.
Which means, and I'm gonna say a question that we've already really have the answer to, but I want to drill this home. Cause and effect are not linear, are they?
They're not linear. They're not linear. And think of the implications of that. Think of the implications of that. One of the challenges that I issue to the reader in the book is that we all like to play around with the novelty question of, what advice would I give to my younger self? What would I say if I could go back in time? That may be a literal question.
Yes.
That may be something in effect that you can do and are doing all the time. How do I know the past is the past, so to speak? How do your viewers know the past is the past, so to speak? We may be revising and selecting, not manifesting, but selecting all the time from an infinitude of possibilities that run in every direction, Imagine a spherical object, a spherical dimension with arrows running through it in every single direction. It's a coarse perspective, but it's this notion that time doesn't move in this linear straight line. This novelty that we all enjoy thinking about. What would I tell my 15-year-old self, or whatever? You may be doing it right now. You may have a set of memories and recollections that are as clear to you as the very words I'm speaking. And that set of recollections, while real, while concrete, is being infinitely revised right now. So my message to you is, not only is this a wonderful, extraordinary dimension to human existence that we may not have suspected, but be careful, because there might be painful things, for example, that one wants to undo that have brought us very good things. Sometimes painful episodes result in personal refinement, maturity, things that never would have happened without a struggle. So use a great deal of perspective in your life, because you may be infinitely more powerful than you've grasped, which also makes you radically self-responsible.
It's true. There's a homework assignment I love to give my coaching clients, which is to hop past the, I'll put it in quotes, present moment, to get to their future self and write them a letter of advice of where they want to be, as if it is already there.
Yes.
Coaching them so that they can skip past the present moment.
Yeah. And that may be as absolutely real as the Schrödinger's cat experiment, in that while Schrödinger's cat was a thought experiment, It was intended to direct people's attention to this state of surreal reality that we live in as an actual necessity.
So since we're talking about cause and effect, we're talking about going back in time and meddling with things. I have to share this morning, just before the show, I
Yeah.
found out we're going to have a baby.
All right. How wonderful. Terrific. That's
Woohoo!
so wonderful. Now I knew moments earlier, but that is just so wonderful. Congratulations. That is just so wonderful.
Thank you. And, you know, we named her beforehand, assuming it's a she. We
Mhm.
have been doing these thought experiments
How wonderful.
and writing about this as if she's already here.
Yes.
Living
Right. Right.
as if, I call it the future present. The future is already here. Even though we're in the present moment, it already exists.
Yes. Isn't that remarkable? Isn't that wonderful? The birth already exists. And, I mean, I've often said to people that in terms of the cosmic framework we experience, we live under many laws and forces, and that we experience physical decline, for example, that mortality alone tells us something about the limitations that we have to face. But there's a professor of medicine at Wake Forest University Medical School named Robert Lanza, and he theorizes, apropos of everything that you and I have been discussing. I mean, we've talked about birth. Let's talk about death.
Sure.
He theorizes that we die only insofar as we perceive death. Because if you were to take the Schrödinger cat experiment, for example, and extrapolate it, and take the multiple worlds theory, and take the time collapse theory, and take all these things that we've been talking about, and we haven't even touched upon psychical research and precognition and what that suggests about the fluidity of time, he would say that if time and if experience is in infinitude, if we are all in a state of superposition, so to speak, and it's only when we take a measurement, basically, that we experience a kind of freeze frame on the matrix board and see ourselves in these circumstances at this present moment, it's only in that respect that we experience death. And it's very hard to wrap our minds around this because, again, not only have we been raised to understand time as linear and reality as an either or, but we need to understand it that way in order for us as five sensory, although I would argue we're certainly more than five sensory, but in terms of our day-to-day experience, our sensory equipment requires us to view reality with limitation rather than through cleansed doors of perception. But if we were capable of navigating in a sensory manner this larger reality, we would have to realize birth as an infinity, death as an infinity, all these experiences as occurring simultaneously and without limitation. But instead, we experience them in moments, as if we're peering through a keyhole or peering through the microscope. So we experience the moments of a measurement, or the moments of a perception, or the moments of a joyful experience, such as birth and expectancy. We gain glimpses. We gain glimpses. We've been given that much in terms of our day-to-day existence, but the reality is much greater and much different.
So thank you. And I want to go into imagining our world into being and the limitations to that. But before we do that, since you mentioned precognition, real quickly, can we share? We've had Dean on the show before, but can you share
great.
real briefly about precognition? Because there is hard science behind this.
Without question. And I think one of the great opportunities facing our generation and one of the great challenges facing our generation is our ability to acknowledge and become educated as to the hard science around precognition, ESP, telepathy. You mentioned Dean Radin, who's been on the show. Dean is a good friend of mine. He's in the book. He's helped me with a variety of insights. Dean is probably, I would say today in the 21st century, Dean is the inheritor to another one of my intellectual heroes, who is J.B. Rhine, who was the great ESP experimenter at Duke University starting in the early 1930s. And J.B. is really the person here in America who created ESP studies as a contemporary science. And figures like Dean and Louisa Rhine, Darrell Bem, who's a psychologist at Cornell University, and others who are engaging in serious psychical research have found that we human beings are able to glean information in ways that go beyond the five senses. That people, and not only that, not only are there certain subjects who can get above average hits on a deck of cards before the actual face has been revealed and turned over, but Dean's experiments demonstrate, and Darrell Bem's experiments demonstrate, that we actually have sensory reactions to things before they occur. And one of Dean's experiments, for example, involves showing people images that are emotionally either very arousing or very disturbing. And what happens moments before the revelation of these images to the subjects in the experiments is that they demonstrate the bodily effects, let's say, of agitation, of sweat, of adrenal secretion, of heightened heartbeat or blood pressure. So, for example, if you're showing people a series of images and one of the images in the series is violent, you're going to have a bodily reaction to that violent image, just to cite one example. And it's measurable. Let's say.
And measuring it, you're going to have a violent reaction before you've even seen it.
Before you've seen it, moments before you've seen it, your sweat glands begin to secrete, for example, or blood begins to rush to the center of your body. You know, these various things that happen to us when the fight or flight mechanism kicks in. And Dean has produced this data that is absolutely dead to rights, clinically sound, and other scientists have as well. There was a scientist who died at a tragically young age in the early 1990s named Charles Honorton, who conducted a series of experiments known as the Ganzfeld experiments. Ganzfeld is German for whole field or open field. And what Honorton found was that if you placed people into a comfortable sensory deprivation state, like having them recline in an easy chair and putting on eye shades, putting on headphones, they demonstrated a heightened receptivity to being able to identify images that, in effect, were transmitted to them by some sort of by a subject who was outside the deprivation tank and who might have been looking at images of a boat or a rocket ship or a house, and that when subjects were placed into comfortable states of sensory deprivation, they were better able to pick up, so to speak, on the transmission or what is presumed to be the telepathic conveyance of these images. And Charles Honorton, shortly before his death, co-authored a paper with a hardened skeptic of psychical research, a psychologist named Ray Hyman, who's now professor emeritus at the University of Oregon. And what they concluded in this jointly written paper was that the data was completely unpolluted, uncorrupted, and valid, both across a wide variety of experiments. And Ray Hyman, who's a well-known critic of parapsychology, said that he did not believe that ESP or telepathy or thought transmission was possible. But he agreed that the data was unpolluted and that further study was warranted. And the challenge facing our generation is, do we take that seriously? Do we take that seriously? Of course, your viewers are going to take that seriously. But there's lots of reporters and academics who only know this material based on the first 5 hits that they get on Google. And they have been trained not to take it seriously, which means that we might wait another generation until we take a really significant step forward in terms of these experiments. They're very inexpensive. It's not like it's a barrier in terms of money, but they've fallen into disrepute on many college campuses thanks to the work of certain materialist critics who fear that these experiments open the door to irrationality. And of course, they're wrong. Slamming shut that door is the act of irrationality. That's the act of burning the fleet and refusing to explore. And our generation is on a precipice.
Let's talk about how we can explore. And I want to dive into the 3 steps of Neville Goddard in just a second. But if I'm recalling correctly, one thing about the Ganzfeld experiments, or maybe more recent ones, is they did some experiments with students at Juilliard, more creative students. And they got even more positive results, which to me speaks to the power of human imagination and creativity.
Yes, isn't that something? Students who had a capacity, and again, I can only use colloquial language to describe this, but who had the capacity to kind of let themselves go,
Hmm.
they demonstrated higher results. And I'm in great sympathy with something that William James said because I feel it in myself, frankly. James said that he was one of those people, unlike the Juilliard students,
Hmm.
who was unable to kind of let the doors of perception just fly off their hinges and just let himself go and allow different possibilities and ideas to roam freely throughout him. And he thought that was probably why he didn't have greater success with his own experiments in these areas. And I feel some of that too, because I'm what you would call a very kind of orderly, rational person. And like James, I have that difficulty of letting the doors of perception just fly off the hinges. But the Juilliard students, in addition to being very talented, great artists and virtuosos of their art, whether it's composing or dance. I mean, these are deeply talented people. Coupled with that talent, they have that capacity to let the door fly off the hinges, and they demonstrated greater effects in these experiments.
Woohoo! And
Mhm.
I'm thinking of Jessica and myself. We straddle kind of both worlds. We're
Yeah,
linear for
yeah.
the show, but then this morning, after we find out, we go right before we go to the gym. There's a thunderclap. No storm, a thunderclap. We come back from the gym. There's a thunder. There's the most amazing sunrise that we've seen since we moved to Colorado. There's a
No kidding.
thunderclap. There's a double rainbow. There's another double rainbow, and we're taking photos of all of this stuff, and we're going, we get it.
Yeah,
We
how
get it.
wonderful. How wonderful. That is just terrific. Beautiful, beautiful. So glad I could be here for this very special show.
It's a very special show,
Talk about
Mitch,
the
and I'm
Miracle
so glad
Club.
it's you who's here.
Yeah, thank you.
So let's
Thank you.
let's go from there, and we've been taking people along, and we want to share with them some how-tos. Let's talk the 3 steps of Neville Goddard.
Sure. This is something I walk through in the book, and it's a favorite thing of mine to present to people because this is Neville's method in a nutshell. And Neville was really the person, in my view, who boiled all of this down into a practical series of steps. People could listen to all this and be like, wow, I still can't see an infinity. I still can't understand how there's a dead alive cat. How does any of this affect my life? And Neville's challenge to his listeners was that you can enter into and serve as a force of selectivity among these infinite possibilities. And here's how it involves 3 very basic steps. This is Neville's formula. So get ready. You won't even need to write it down because it's actually quite easy to remember.
Mm-hmm.
Step 1 is you have to arrive first and foremost at a very deep desire, something that you want without any compromise. Everything is going to have consequences. Everything is going to have counter activities. That's just the way of life. But regardless of that, and accepting that we may not have ultimate perspective at all times, at least in the state that we occupy, you have to focus your mind upon a truly deeply felt, passionately held desire, something that you absolutely know you want without compromise. Everything begins with an intensely felt, emotively charged desire. That's step 1. And it may sound simple, but we often fool ourselves. Sometimes we tell ourselves we want something and we're not so sure we really do want something. I mean, sitting down in a period of mature private reflection, acknowledging that our perspective in this framework is incomplete, and deciding on something that we really truly want, that is an act of underestimated power. Mm-hmm. So start there. That's step 1. Step 2, you must enter a state of physical immobility. This is the state of pregnancy from which things are born. You have to go into a state of deeply relaxed meditation, mm-hmm, or some sort of drowsy, semi-somnambulant state, not giving way to sleep. Not giving way to sleep yet, because you want your attention to still be focused. You want to still have command over your attentive faculties. And Neville said that you can assist yourself by entering into this relaxed state, by using the state that you're naturally in just the moments before you fall asleep at night. And this actually relates to the Ganzfeld experiments, because what was found in the Ganzfeld experiments is that the mind's suppleness and the mind's capacity for extrasensory activity, specifically telepathy, was heightened when the individual was placed into a state of sensory deprivation and relaxed inactivity. Now, sleep researchers refer to this as the hypnagogic state, the hypnagogic state. It's the state that all of us are naturally in those few moments before we fall asleep at night. And in those moments, and we also enter the same state just before we are aroused to wakefulness in the morning. It's this time that we experience as being almost surreal, like a Salvador Dali painting, where things seem to bend. Suggestiveness can launch us onto these very unusual, very vivid, hallucinatory waking dreams. And yet we do have control over the direction of our attention, which is very, very important. So Neville said, you want to enter this state of exquisite suggestibility. And it's interesting because this was decades before the Ganzfeld experiments. This was decades before sleep researchers began to use the term hypnagogia and talk about this very suggestible, supple, semi-hallucinatory, but also vivid and cognizant state of mind that we enter just before drifting off to sleep. But Neville instinctively, and as a mystic and as a student of life, understood the usefulness of this state. He personally would eat lunch and then relax in an easy chair and induce himself into one of these slightly hypnotic states at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So you could do it any time, you can do it anywhere, as long as it's quiet and you're not going to be disturbed, and you can be very relaxed, almost to the point of sleep, but not quite at that point. Not quite at that point. People use terms in different ways, and Neville's use of the term meditation was to connote this hypnagogic state, this relaxed, drowsy state. Okay, so that's number 2. So number 1, select a passionately felt desire. Number 2, enter a state of physical immobility. And finally, we have number 3. Number 3 is you must concoct in your mind a little drama, a little scene that you're in that implies the fulfillment of your aim, that implies the fulfillment of your desire. And this little scene or this little drama must have you within it. You're not watching it as if you're seeing it on a screen, but you're a performer in it. Neville would say, if I want to climb a ladder, for example, I don't see myself climbing a ladder. I climb. I feel those rungs in my hand. I feel the solidity of the rungs underneath my feet and my weight on them. And he said, what you do is you concoct this little simple drama in your mind. So, for example, there was a woman at one of his Los Angeles lectures in the late 1940s who told him that she wanted to be married. That's what she wanted more than anything on earth. So he said, okay, so for example, you might feel a wedding band, a gold wedding band around your finger. Twist the band around your finger. Feel the weight of the band. It's slight pressure on your finger. Just feel it. Just twist it around. Run that little scene through your mind over and over and over, so long as it feels natural. And then when you feel a state of fulfillment, when you feel that you've really run this scene through your mind and you feel a state of emotional contentment, you are at liberty, if you so like, to let yourself fall asleep. And it can be very powerful, whether it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon or whether it's 11 o'clock at night or whatever your habits are, to allow yourself to fall asleep thereafter. And his endorsement of concocting a little scene in your mind was that the simpler the scene and the more exact and specific the scene, the less likely that your mind would go wandering off. And he says, we all have this problem where we think by association, and so you might be doing something and then you catch yourself and you find your mind has wandered off. Just bring it back. But it's easier to bring it back, and it's easier to avoid the wandering of the mind if your scene is quite simple. So again, these are the three steps of creation. Arrive at a passionately held desire, enter a very relaxed state of physical immobility, and third and finally, concoct in your mind a little scene. And he said, you must have faith. You must have faith that an assumption, if persisted in, will eventually concretize into reality. Sometimes the waiting period can be very, very short, but there is naturally a gestation period for everything. A gestation period for a little baby is 9 months. A gestation period for a chicken is 21 days. A gestation period for a horse is 11 months. There's going to be all these different periods of time. And he said that sometimes something will happen very quickly. Sometimes it could be a matter of hours. Sometimes it could be a matter of days. At times, he remarked that if you look in scripture, the period between visualization and manifestation is never more than 3 days. And he had his own formula for determining that. But he also remarked that there can be a period of gestation time that is required in order for all the different elements to come into place. Have no concern with it. Have no concern with it. And don't concern yourself with the method of unfolding required for your wish to become actualized. That nature, so to speak, will find the most direct, harmonious, and frictionless way possible for this to unfold. But allow for the fact that there is naturally a gestation period for whatever it is you're looking for, but stay with it, that if you continue to do this night after night, you just have to remain faithful to your assumption, and that assumption will eventually concretize into reality. Try it. Neville would always say, try it. If what I'm saying to you sounds suspicious, sounds too good to be true, sounds too simple to be believed, prove me wrong. And if you prove me wrong, forget you ever heard my name. Try it tonight. And he would always issue the challenge to his listeners, and this was among the things that I loved about him. He would always issue the challenge, what do you want right now? What do you want this very minute? And when we're done here, depending where you are, obviously don't do this if you're in your car, but if you're at home and you can, recline and go into a relaxed state and do these 3 steps. You don't need to write them down. You remember them. They're so simple. They're so natural. They're exquisitely simple. And he would always challenge people, just try it. These ideas are meant to be practical, or they're nothing at all.
Woohoo!
Yeah.
Can you share the story of how you tried it on Wake Up and Live?
Oh, yes. Wake Up and Live is a self-help book that was written in the 1930s by a woman named Dorothea Brand. And I was very eager to republish this book and to narrate an audio edition of this book. And I spent several months tracking down Dorothea Brand's family in the state of Vermont so that I could arrange to license rights to her book. And thereafter, I was eager to I narrate a lot of audiobooks, and I was very eager to narrate this one. And the audio rights had been licensed to a publisher with whom I had worked before. And I asked this publisher if I could narrate it, and the person wouldn't get back to me, and then finally did get back to me and said no. And I was very perplexed as to this person's refusal, because I had done successful work with this publisher in the past, and I felt almost like I was born to narrate this book, and I couldn't understand it. And it was frustrating, and it was off-putting. But rather than allow myself to sink into disappointment, and believe me, I did feel some of that without question, rather than allow myself to sink into disappointment, I decided to use Neville's method. And I kept at it for a couple of weeks, I think. And this is what happened, and I recount this in the book. I was completely surprised to realize that basically through a turn of events I never could have foreseen, the rights to the audio narration of the book had left that one publisher that I was contacting and had gone to another publisher through a series of events that I never could have foreseen or influenced. And I said to the person, the licensor, the licensing agent who sold the rights, would you please tell this other publisher that I've recorded audiobooks before, and I'm really dying to narrate this one. And she said to me that she would. And she came back to me shortly later and said, I told this to this other publisher, and he said to me, I emailed Horowitz a week ago to narrate a couple of books for me, and he never got back to me. Why not? And I said, I never heard of this. So I went and I looked in my spam folder to see if the email was in there. It was not in there. And then I went into some super duper spam folder to see if it was in there. And there, for heaven knows what reason, was the email from a week earlier saying he wanted me to narrate a couple of audiobooks for him. There it was, dated 7 days earlier. 7 days earlier.
Just what we're talking about.
Right. And so I got back to him and I said, thank you very much. Not only am I just seeing your email for the first time, but in addition to these two other books, I would love to narrate this book, Wake Up and Live for You. He said yes. So I signed a 3-book contract with him, and I continue to work very, very closely with this publisher to this very day. And I did nothing outwardly to make any of this happen, but I used Neville's method.
I love that you say outwardly, because that's a key. If we're understanding one big takeaway from today is that causality is not what we think. And just because you can't pick up the phone and have the result that you're looking for, if you do the inner work,
yes,
you can create your reality.
Yes. And I always say to people, and it's been very helpful for me to discover this in Neville's work, these gestation periods that we speak of can be very tricky. And sometimes people say, well, I did X, Y, and Z and nothing happened. And I have to remind them, as I have to remind myself, the book isn't closed yet. That chapter isn't closed yet. Just stay aware and stay alert, because something might happen or may have happened or might be happening right now that will speak directly to the thing that you've been working on. Just remember that phrase, please, because I have to remember it myself. That book isn't closed yet. Life is very strange. Life is very strange. You know, we all know that expression, careful what you wish for, you just might get it. Yeah. I try to trace the origins of that expression in the Miracle Club, and here's the best I can come up with. I think that expression originally began with the philosopher Goethe, who put it in a different way. What Goethe said was that what you wish for when you're young comes upon you in waves when you're old. So be careful. That was the point of origin, I believe, for that expression. And it's the kind of thing that a person immediately wants to argue with. Well, wait a minute. You know, there's lots of things I wish for I didn't get. You know, but we're strangers to ourselves sometimes. We're strangers to ourselves. And I think what Goethe was driving at is that we formulate our lives, and yet because of the interval of time that occurs, or the gestation period, we're very forgetful. And we lose track of details, and we lose track of ourselves. And these time intervals that we experience, which may very well be illusory, but they are our experience nonetheless, these time intervals can be very tricky and very deceptive. So before you conclude, I didn't get what I want, remember what Goethe said. Ask yourself what you've really been walking around with, and don't be so sure. Don't be so sure that the book is closed.
I love it. What does it mean, as we start to wrap this up here, to be reborn from within your imagination?
Yeah, Neville believed that each one of us will experience in a tactile, real way the sensation of being reborn from within our own skull. Minerva, the goddess of wisdom, was said to be reborn from the skull of Zeus. Christ was crucified at Golgotha, which translates as the place of the skull. Neville had the experience in 1959, here in New York City, where I am, of being reborn from within his own skull. And he said, this is the point at which you will become aware of your own divine nature, as Neville saw it. Neville believed that the human imagination is God, and that we are all rooted in that in fact, everything you see, hear, and experience is the result of your own mental images. So, for example, your viewers may think they're hearing some guy named Mitch go on about all this, but any viewer who's hearing this right now, I am rooted in you. Michael is rooted in you, as you are ultimately rooted in God. And Neville said, you will come to realize your own divine nature, your own resurrection, so to speak, through this sensation of being reborn through your skull. And that he believed that every individual would have a tactile realization of that experience.
Beautiful. So this is an absolutely brilliant book. I can't recommend The Miracle Club enough, Mitch. I love it. I love it. And I've read it several times now, and I pull out more each time. And it really, not only is it a guide through this, but it is a thought experiment to begin wrapping your mind further and further around these concepts, to truly make your mind as builder, the more and more you are able to wrap yourself around the concepts.
Thank you. That's my wish for the book. The whole thing is really a guide to self-experimentation, and I really appreciate that description.
So where can people go to find your book then, and to find out more?
Well, The Miracle Club goes on sale, or is published officially on October 16th, but you can pre-order it now in digital, audio, print, whatever format you like. You can pre-order it through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, an independent bookseller. And you will receive it on October 16th, and you will become a member of the Miracle Club. There's no membership card. There's no loyalty oath. There's no secret decoder ring. But just by experimenting, you become a member of the Miracle Club.
And I have a feeling it's even more powerful than a secret decoder ring.
I may work on that, actually.
Love it.
Thank you.
So any last words of wisdom before maybe we dive into a really brief meditation?
Sure. I would just say experiment. You know, the original Miracle Club was a group of occult explorers here in New York City in 1875. And one of them received a mysterious letter, an anonymously written mysterious letter, which read, "Do not give up thy club. Try." The words try capitalized with an exclamation point. So let's revive that spirit of experimentation today in the 21st century. Try. That's my simple message. Experiment. Let's all co-seek together. Let's learn together, because my contention is that there are vicissitudes and folds within the human mind that we haven't even begun to guess at. And all that's required is just a willingness to try.
Woohoo! Thank you so much, Mitch. So do you have then a brief meditation you wouldn't mind guiding us in?
Yeah, I'd be delighted. Thank you. Let's all close our eyes and kind of get centered for a minute.
Unless you're driving, do this later.
Unless you're driving, please do this later. Take a few deep breaths. I'd like you to take these few moments that we have together and allow yourself to open to the possibility that your mind and your thoughts and your mental images are vastly more powerful than anything we've ever been taught, than anything we've ever been allowed to imagine. And with this knowledge, consider the extraordinary potential you possess right now to direct and select the events you experience, the relationships you have, the tasks and activities to which you apply yourself. You have the potential to select all of these things, and in fact, you and I are doing it all the time. We just don't know it. Sometimes because there is an interval of time or a period of gestation between the thought and the experience. And sometimes because there is such a rushed, busy crisscrossing of different and sometimes contradictory thoughts and intentions and emotions running through our psyches. But what if, for periods of time during the day, we could focus those mental pictures, those emotionalized thoughts, those intentions. And you've received a very simple 3-part exercise that allows you to focus all that material that runs through your psyche, to focus it with feeling, to focus it with sensory vividness, to focus it into a scene in which you are not an observer, but a player. And once you hone this craft, this pleasing, simple craft of focusing your thoughts into a simple, pleasurable, emotionally charged scene that reflects the natural outcome of what you're looking for, you have found a tool of selection. You have found a way to cleanse the doors of perception. And you have found a way to select from among infinite possibilities a cherished, desired, deeply valued event, an outcome in your existence. This is the power that you possess. We have evidence of this from hundreds of years of testimony, from current scientific study and theorizing, and you can experience this as an empirical fact in your own life by dedicating these moments of time and effort each day, starting this day, starting right now, to what you want. So I invite you first to focus on a desire. Focus on a cherished desire. And after we conclude here today, take the steps that we've been discussing during this past hour. Use those steps. Use those steps. That we live in a serial universe seems to be, without question, how to use that serial universe is yours to discover and to experiment with. And a heartfelt welcome to you to the Miracle Club. Thank you.
I cannot thank you enough, Mitch.
Thank you.
This was a grand slam World Series out of the park.
It flew by.
The superlatives go on and on. It did. This was phenomenal.
Thank you. It really flew by. I always love doing your show. And I love your viewers. I love your listeners. I've said this before. I get the most beautiful, most intelligent emails from your viewers. I always write back. So if anybody has a comment or a question or anything to share, always feel free to reach out to me.
Where do I reach out to?
Throw my name into Google. You'll find your way to my website. My email is there. I am super easy to find.
Cannot thank you enough. May the books fly off the shelves.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
So for everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get the Miracle Club, and begin building your own reality today and shine bright. Woohoo!
Thank you. And a big congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome, Mitch. Awesome.
All right.
Awesome.
Great. It really flew by. I looked at my phone and it was 12:59 and I thought, wow, it felt like 15 minutes. It's so wonderful. Oh, congratulations. I am so glad I could do this show today, of all things.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!